Audio, yep, the audio's working now.
Right, okay, so I'll get Nicola to check it again, because we haven't got the link out yet.
Yeah, there's a new link, isn't it?
Yeah.
I need that as well, you see.
Yeah, no, I've got the link.
Yeah, that's all going to work now. So.
Yeah, okay, let's get Nicola to just check it before we send the link out. And I've also got her to get us another power supply, so she'll have another lead. So she'll have another extension lead, so we can plug this one in over there.
That'd be good. I feel a little bit. I've been sitting there waiting because at the moment, if they don't touch it for about 10 minutes, it'll go to sleep.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, I mean, I can start. Thank you, darling.
Talking
Do you
about
want to
this.
just check the sound?
It wasn't working at all.
Yeah, no, we've just fixed it, I think.
Yeah, it's fixed. I can
Is
see.
it the same link?
No, the link has gathered across to you.
Okay. We need to make sure we delete the channels as well. People are googling our YouTube channel.
Yeah, we thought it can't work.
I'm dealing with that later.
So?
I'm dealing. A bit.
Something that I would love to do as a UK national.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
I couldn't figure
delete.
it out, and because I
You
had to
can't.
get the new one up and running.
It's not deleting it.
Hello?
I think I've jabbed it to you already, but let me.
We have ways of measuring who does what.
Yeah.
But
That was going to be my suggestion.
the way we can do it is you have to make it private.
All the other ones are deleted.
Yeah, I know. I had this last time. Even though you think you've deleted it, you
The
haven't.
reason is we took down.
I don't know how to do it when I've got something running at the same time.
It's been rather painful getting back to an IPv6.
No, you probably can't. No.
IPv6.
Can you get on?
I can't. You ain't got that top of
It's the new system just gone beta, so that'll be live
First up,
probably in January. We will publish some V6 proportionate stats from that, but we've actually been measuring them on our second LAN in London, stream-based network, and it's still negligible. But the problem doesn't. Well, the problem with CPU is that when we keep featuring the CPU issue at our quarterly member meetings, we have a couple of real stars. I mean, Adrian Kennard, probably highest amongst them. However, the big four networks have been pretty open about what they're doing with the CPU. So it's coming. But I mean, they're going to be replacing all the CPE for all UK broadband consumers, and that isn't going to happen. What's the business case for that? There isn't one. It's as simple as that. There isn't one. There isn't one. Whilst they're still rolling out carrier grade NAT and in some cases they've just hoarded V4 addresses. They cannot produce a business case to replace all the CPE.
That is not what Stuart Smith said here 2 weeks ago publicly. If you check the information,
I'm generalising across all networks.
No, so Stuart Smith, Stuart?
No.
Stuart Smith leads BT's IPv6 rollout plan. Stuart Smith publicly stated, business case for IPv6 is now clear to BT. That was a quote he made here 2 weeks ago.
I know they're network architects, and he doesn't agree.
Neil McRae.
Yeah.
Neil McRae, different.
Hello. Okay. So yeah, that's got a red thing. It's looking at me. So right, I'm William Waits from Hubs and the University of Edinburgh. I should say that I'm these days doing some things more with scientific computing than with network engineering, but that's fine. And this is, I guess, a brief update. And many of you will have seen a lot of this before. A brief update on where we have come in the past year or so in community networking in Scotland. So, right, there's Europe, Scotland. We know where that is, and we start with a very small amount of history that I'll go over very quickly because some of you will know this. Having to do with these things on the west coast there, in particular, starting in this sea loch here, which is Loch Foran, and yeah, there, which looks like this, some sort of small settlements of 50 or 100 people or so, and a long time ago, well, not that long ago, but in 2008 or so, some people in these places found out that they were in bad circumstances as far as getting any kind of internet access. Too much copper. Copper's in bad shape. I actually did a theoretical simulation of what copper looks like at that, and it's theoretically you might be able to get 2400 baud, but even if the copper was fine, the nearest slightly larger settlement has no bandwidth into it. Satellite is slow and expensive, it doesn't work very well, and the mountains block it. And so the first thing people did was they started writing letters and complaining and saying, BT, please help me, and writing the politicians and saying, politicians, please help me because BT is not helping, and none of that did any good. So they decided to start building things themselves. So in around 2008, started building things that looked, actually at that point, they didn't look quite like this. This is a slightly newer design, using wireless links on the order of 15, sometimes 20 kilometers, expanded to a ring of masts around there, and using lots of free software and that sort of thing. With the help of a bunch of people at the University of Edinburgh, and eventually upstream bandwidth from the University of Highlands and Islands College on Skye. This went very well. The neighbors said, oh, that's cool, we can do the same thing, and so they started doing that, and so Eigg and Rum and these islands build the same sort of thing, and then over on the other side of the mountain that was blocking the satellites there, they decided to build theirs with help, and then Applecross a little bit further north, and Lochiel a little bit further south, and then a trial link a very long distance to Northern Mull, and that worked fine, and Slate, and then further away Lagan and Lothian and Harriet and Sobo, and I didn't mention Logie, but should have, especially since they're in the room. I'm sorry. But so many people have been doing this around, all in a similar model, all with all helping each other really, and that's great. These networks, at least originally, were built in many different ways. They're not centrally managed. Each of them is built according to what the people who are building it understand how to do. This meant that in some cases you got, flat bridge networks, which many people in the room might know are not a good idea, but don't necessarily, it's not necessarily obvious when you first put them together, and many other ways that you can build it. And there's a certain amount of, now aversion, this is the wrong word really. People like the idea of dynamic routing, but it seems to be complicated and scary. On the other hand, we want redundant paths and what to do about that. And in remote places, this is very, very important because the mean time to repair can be quite large. using equipment as it comes from the vendors is, and vendors here we're talking about, a particular example is Ubiquity, which is great if you just want it to be a wireless bridge, but not so great if you wanted to do things like dynamic routing. Some free software like OpenWRT seems to be too high a barrier generally, and none of the major router vendors that make fully featured things that you might like seem to make ones that do this and at a reasonably low price and reasonably low power, especially since in some cases the masts we're talking about have no mains power and they're powered by solar panels and wind turbines and things like that. So what do we do? First thing we do is we start to try to connect the networks that are adjacent to each other so they can provide mutual support and failover. And if an upstream link goes down in one place, their neighbors can help them out. Make a nice intercommunity backbone using BGP and private ASs. Use radios as bridges, and don't try to make them to do anything fancy. Don't try too much to interfere in how individual networks are run, because they're run according to what the local people are able to do and support. And we have plenty of evidence that redundant paths are good. Fiber cuts, power cuts, lightning strikes, all these sorts of things. So then we looked at this, and this was reasonably successful, and so we said, well, okay, we're going to try to formalize this, and this basically takes us up until about a year ago, where we have a whole bunch of these community networks. They're encapsulated in autonomous systems, again, usually, not entirely now, but usually using private ASs. They retain their internal structures. And doing this enables them to collectively negotiate for transit and services and these sorts of things, which they might be too small to do otherwise. It looks like a BGP confederation for people who like BGP and those sorts of things. And there are currently two such. There's the one on the west coast and the one in the south of Scotland, basically south of Edinburgh here, Harriet, Stobo, East Lothian, that kind of place. And this is working very well, and we've had lots of help from these organizations here. And yeah, so we've done that. This is a similar diagram to what I showed at the IXScotland meeting last January, but a lot of it is built now, where a lot of it was planned then. And this is nice. We have sort of two main sites. We have redundant links through them. There are actually a couple more redundant links in there now. We're peering at the exchange, and that's great. And I suppose we're one of the kinds of organizations who is having a very slight early mover disadvantage to being at the exchange, in that we're an eyeball network, and there aren't very much in the way of content networks there at the moment. Although we had some very encouraging and positive talks with some content networks at the RIGHT meeting last month. Yeah, so impact, this has been very good. People in very remote places have been able to take university courses. Children in some of these places, like Eigg, for example, when they're in high school, they have to take a boat to go to high school, and we have bad weather, and that stops the boats from running, and the children usually lose about 3 weeks a year or so due to weather, where now they can do at least some of their schoolwork online. We've even seen local businesses moving into these places. And we've seen telemedicine, and a lot of this is not, it sort of breaks the traditional model that was baked into the access infrastructure 15, 20 years ago of asymmetry, because a lot of it is not just looking at websites. A lot of it is there's a lot of video going on. There's a lot of people taking pictures and uploading them. There's all sorts of things, and we're even starting to see some local services. Music from a recording studio that's on Eigg being shared only locally within the local network. And so all of this has been very good. There have been a number of technical problems, and that there's this number 7 there has to do with the OSI layers, and layers less than 7 basically mean layers having to do with the technical infrastructure. And some of these are having to do with NAT. In fact, a lot of them are having to do with address translation, which is a big problem. It's not immediately obvious that it's a big problem when you just go and build a network, because what you see is, I've put in this network, I have a NAT, I can look at Facebook, and that works until it doesn't. It works until Google starts meting out collective punishment on the community because one computer had a virus, and then all of a sudden nobody else can look at Google without entering CAPTCHAs. Interestingly, this is a similar problem that the anonymity networks like Tor also have. We've had more esoteric address collisions between UHI and these sorts of things. Some of these upstream links use ADSL lines, and ADSL lines are, despite what you might read, where you can buy your internet access for £10 a month or something. ADSL lines are actually extremely expensive when you try to use them. Something like upwards of £40 or £50 per megabit per second per month is what it really works out to, and providers of DSL services actually notice when you start using in a pattern that's not a normal pattern. IPv6 adoption has been very slow. There are some of the networks that we have this. It's quite disappointing that, well, there's a number of reasons for this. It's been generally slow in Scotland, and it's actually somewhat disappointing that the Scottish government, engaging in large procurements, has done nothing at all to mandate IPv6 as a requirement. It should be. That's a subject of a whole other talk. Equipment quality, especially at the very low end, has been very variable, and we're also outgrowing the available capacity. There is no capacity yet from BT there. The only significant capacity that we have, or the single largest flow on the UHI network, and it's over Vodafone, Bus, Cable and Wireless, whatever it's called today, network, which is not possible to be upgraded. So there's a bit of a problem. We're running out of headroom. In fact, we have run out of headroom there. Problems. So all of those sorts of things are can be dealt with in one way or another, mostly through education, which is actually a point here. But we've had a number of other problems that are somewhat above the technical sort of layers. A lot of this, there was, everybody knows about this giant BT procurement to build fiber infrastructure. There's a smaller pot of money for giving money to communities who want to build these sorts of things, but the process is very cumbersome. There is a whole bunch of worry on the part of the civil servants about state aid and double funding, which are actually in some ways have two incompatible sort of goals, because state aid is meant to prevent distortion of markets by government, and the anti-double funding rule means that distortion of markets is guaranteed. And what we have ended up with is this kind of patchwork, and these are taken from the website there, where there are some spots where community broadband is allowed and some spots where community broadband isn't allowed. And the reason it's allowed is because BT has somehow claimed this area, and it's not allowed to provide any service there, which means that there are a lot of places here that would be viable but aren't. And we somehow have to work with this, basically have to work with doing community broadband around what BT wishes to do. It's been incredibly frustrating, actually. BT's network doesn't have any particularly strong open access provisions, so they're putting in all this fiber, and the focus has been uniquely on we want people to have such and such a megabit per second at their house, and with virtually no focus on we want to be able to make wholesale services like layer 2 Ethernet LAN extension services available. There are only a few places where they are. We don't know where most of them are. We know where they are in the Highlands and Islands. The rest of Scotland has said they don't know, which kind of begs the question of the management of this project, because if BT has been given so many hundreds of millions of pounds to do this, and the Scottish government doesn't know what they're spending it on, I wonder what's happening. And the process again with BT is opaque, and the territorial disputes have to do with this double funding thing, which has made life quite difficult. I don't know what can be done about that, those 2 points there, but what can be done about the stuff on the previous slide is education. And this is something that we actually can do because we have very good relationships with universities. And we can start running courses on how you actually get stuff done and how you actually build things. Not courses focused on a specific vendor, because the concepts of how does IP routing work and how do routing protocols work and these sorts of things are in fact quite general. And so we have some kind of a plan to do at least a summer school next year, and hopefully we can get people to help visit and teach and share experiences. And we've actually also had quite a lot of interest from community networks elsewhere in Europe, wanting to work with us, and yeah, and that's great. So, kind of in summary, I think the next slide is the thank you slide. Yeah, thank you. There's a beautiful view there. So, I mean, I suppose the summary is we've made quite a lot of progress. There is substantial engagement, and we have quite a lot of this sort of running. But it's some parts of the environment that have nothing at all to do with technical concerns have been quite frustrating. So growth has been a lot slower than could be hoped, and that's that.
Thank you.
I suggest the same any questions for in the home session. Just to reassure you that I'm going to claw some time back from the bits that are allocated to things later in the agenda, so don't worry if we're massively overrunning. So Barry, please don't feel under too much pressure.
Right, as he's only given me 2 minutes, I'm going to have to outrun Usain Bolt to get to the end of this presentation. So we'll go through it very quickly. If I find out the right buttons. Just so you don't believe that all the rural properties and areas are in Scotland, we've got them in the north of England as well. And this is where the barn patch is. That's the north end of Lancashire. That is an AONB, which makes it extremely difficult, as well as being sparsely populated. That is an AONB. That's the Loon Valley, and everything to the right of the motorway there is our patch. So the numbers basically are 425 square kilometres, 3,500 properties. And just for comparison, you can see we're a little bit more sparsely populated than Edinburgh is, just marginally. I'm going to go through very quickly, but basically what we decided to do was a full FTTH project. So all 3,500 homes get a pair of fibres, point-to-point Ethernet running to gigabit. Average build costs about £1,000 per property, 3.5 million project cost. As I said, 1 gigabit is what we're giving everybody. And in common with William, forget it with government money. We never managed to get a penny out of them, so it's been 100% funded by the community. We've raised 1.7 million so far, cash and work in exchange for cash, loans. We're raising the funding quite nicely from within the community now, so we can complete the project without any public funding, which is great because we can tell them what to do with all their rules and regulations. So getting straight onto what we've done, if you are building a gigabit to the home, you need to think about your infrastructure because it's no good having a gigabit to the home and then a 10 megabit pipe to the internet. So we decided right from day one that what we wanted to build was a pretty world-class network. So what we have actually done is each village node, and there will be 23 of them. I think about half of those are in place. There's 3 more coming on before Christmas. We will pretty well have all our nodes in by Easter next year, so we'll have finished our trunk build. We have 400 and odd kilometres of duct in the ground now, about 100 kilometres to go to complete our backbones. Each village node gets 2 10 gig dark fibre links to a Juniper 4550 switch. We have 2 switching nodes, one at Arcombe in the north and one at Quirmer in the south. So those 2 are actually 15 kilometres apart, but linked with a single fibre. And what we actually have is we have a leased fibre that comes out of Telly City in Manchester, comes 128 kilometres up to Quirmer, and then it continues for another 15 kilometres to Arcombe. So that's a single fibre. We lease it from Geo, which is now Zayo, somebody else anyway. So it comes as dark fibre. We run active DWDM on that using Smart Optics kit. Because it's a single fibre, what we're doing is there's the standard circulators in there. We're using alternative wavelengths for the up and down transmit and receive. So the 16 wavelengths we've got at the moment gives us 8 channels, which can be 10 gig each. At the moment, we've got 4 times 10 gig lit down to Manchester, so we've got 40 gigs of backhaul to Telly City. And what we're doing is we're running the 2 Junipers as a virtual chassis, which is very nice, because if you run it as a virtual chassis, it means the 2 10 gig links, you don't have to worry about routing or spanning tree or anything like that. You can just treat it as a link aggregation group. But it means if we lose either switching node or we lose any of the diverse links from the village will only drop back to 10 gigs, which is not too onerous. Down in Manchester, what we've got is a Juniper MX240, which is a pretty heavyweight piece of kit for those of you who know the Juniper range. We went for the 240 because it's the first one that's fully resilient. It's got dual everything in it. And it also means we can take the cards out, put it into a bigger chassis as we expand. So currently we've got 10, so we've got 8 now, we've got 10 10 gig ports on it and 21 gig. 4 of the 10 gigs run north. And then looking at where we go from the bottom there, we've got a 10 gig port goes to M247, which is one of the big data centers in Manchester. And through them, we then get a gig CDR through to NTT for our IP transit. As I say, it's a 10 gig, so it's burstable 95%. And they're very generously giving us that gig free, so we're not paying for our first gig of transit there. And they're not charging us the port. We also have a 1 gig dark fibre link to the IX Manchester peering switch there. And again, the links people are very kindly not charging us for that port either. They're really nice to us. However, the issue we have to some extent is, although IX Manchester is growing its contents, to be fair, it's still the UK's London centric, so we also wanted to peer at London. So what we've done is M247 is a connections partner, and what we've done is set up a 1 gig level 2 Ethernet down to London, and we peer on the Juniper land down there. Just for interest, the latency is 7.5 seconds. We're talking about 20 milliseconds from Scotland, so 7.5 milliseconds, because it's seconds, milliseconds. It's not too bad, it's fine. So that's what we've got. As you can see, it's a vast amount of capacity. Each village node will have up to a maximum of 192 properties on it. So we're running 20 gigs for 192 properties. And then we're running aggregated 40 gigs down to Manchester. IX Manchester is where we see our primary peering, and we see it as primary because we've got dark fibre to switch, which means if we need to up the capacity, we can go to 10 gigs without having to buy capacity somewhere. If we upgrade down to London, we've obviously got to pay for our 1 gig to 10 gig lift. So the thing I was thinking about was, a lot of this has been happening in the last few weeks. I think we only completed the links in London, I think last week. John mentioned earlier there had been peering at Manchester, but it all went horribly wrong. We were on the old peering, so we had to move to the new. So it's pretty recent. So what I did yesterday morning, in a fit of adventurousness, I thought, let's have a look at statistics and see what we're actually running on that, because I thought you'd probably be interested. So the first thing I did was I looked at the 40 gigs going down to Manchester. We're peaking at 381 meg, which for 700 properties with a gig connection sounds pretty measly, doesn't it? I had to think about that in the bath, and I came to the conclusion it's probably because the bulk of our customers are rural who have never had any decent broadband. They've either had zilch or they've been on sub 512k. They have no history of anything, not iPlayer, all those sorts of things. So I would expect to see quite a rapid growth in that as people actually start. I mean, we know we're hearing from local television shops, there's a huge demand now suddenly for big smart TV, internet ready and all the rest of it. So we think that'll grow. We always anticipated that, and that's why we're so keen on the peering. So things like Akamai and so on, who are at Manchester. But as I said, those numbers, and you see the pattern, of course, is the usual. Weekend it's fatter, The rest of the week, evenings, they come home, that's when they all get on and start doing their entertainment stuff. So it's the antithesis of what you would see on a business network. Okay, so that's that. Now, where's it going? That's what's coming from Manchester. This is the IP transit pipe. And you'll see it's 251. So something like, what, 70–75% of our traffic is coming from IP transit, not from peering. I think this was a monitoring fault. Our network was not down there before anybody accuses us. So that's interesting. I mean, that's higher than I think it ought to be in the end. I think we'd like to see it a lot better than that. And here's our two peering links. And this is where I'm a bit puzzled about what's going on here, because IX Manchester are only seeing 5 megabits. London we're seeing 100. That suggests to me that what we haven't done yet is set up the peering properly at Manchester. I suspect that although we are peering with Akamai and people like that, the traffic is coming through London because we don't have our BGP stuff set up correctly. It's a black art. I don't profess to understand how it all works. I believe it involves a cockerel or a virgin at dawn. If you get it right, you can actually make the traffic go the way you want to. And we clearly haven't got that. So, I mean, health warning on all these figures. It's a work in progress. Okay, so where do my worries lie? I'm not worried about anything in my network. I'm not worried about capacity. I am bloody worried about this link down here to Manchester, because I'm sitting at the end of 128 fibres of a single 9-micron fibre, which is a pretty vulnerable thing to be. I could look to come from Barn with an alternative route down to Manchester. However, that still gives me a vulnerability at Manchester. And if the jumbo jet happens to fall on Telecity in Manchester, I have a problem. So another logical thing is, how about going north? So I could actually come up to Edinburgh and take a layer 2 point-to-point circuit. You mentioned there are a whole lot of carriers who have got capacity within IXScotland, within your data centre. That's fine, but it's a little bit difficult if I just, it's not enough to just do peering, because I need IP transit as well as peering. So really, I need to create a POP up here so I can take IP transit to fall over, as well as that. And just taking a 1 gig circuit like that, I'd have to take 2, I suppose, one for IP transit, one for peering. It doesn't feel very tidy. Amanda and I were sort of having a drink one night, and we sort of wondered about whether there was any margin in extending the fibre we've got up as far as Lancaster, round in a loop past Glasgow to Edinburgh, run DWDM on it, and drop 10/20 gig wavelengths for any community projects or along that path. Whether there were enough projects along the path or within reasonable access range that they could be reached with gig point-to-point wireless or gigs or whatever. So it's something I'm throwing up as an option. I haven't looked at the pricing to get north from Lancaster to Edinburgh, but we're probably about a third of the way from Manchester to Lancaster. There's no real technical challenges about getting up to Edinburgh, but then it would allow each community project that was on that network to either take wavelengths or to merge the traffic into the BGP and IP stuff, depending on what level they want to play at. 10 minutes and 32 seconds. Did you do well?
Given that you've been doing in London for a week, you've done pretty well so far. So hopefully it's picks up from here. Did you join the route service straight away?
Yeah, we're on the reflectors, V4 and V6 reflectors of both. But what happens actually, for those of you who don't know, with peering, the little guys tend to go on the route reflector. So the small ISPs and people who use peer with automatically. The bigger guys, you actually have to contact them and set up a peering relationship. So there's a laborious process of going through this. And there's also an asymmetry, so you've got to watch out for, you might talk to somebody one way and it comes back from London and things like that. So there's a lot of work to be done by people, as I said, who know how to sacrifice a copper to make it all work.
It's a good job Ben's not here, because I could see us having a new project to supply these cockerels with a sharp knife and presumably a plastic bag to put the remains in.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Cocker bar.
Security guards to keep the animal waste people out.
So, Richard, do you want to come up to the front now, and we'll take any more questions for Barry inside the panel session, if that's all right. Could we ask the panelists to come up to the front as well, please? And I'll move out of the way and cut the projector.
We put the projector on.
Yeah.
Presentation one. Just in case I need to show.
Presentation one. Okay.
Hi there, I'm Richard Morell. I'm running the panel discussion today with this sort of dubious target of how do we make Scottish connectivity, or Scotland's connectivity better. Joining me today, we have Mark Tate from Community Broadband Scotland. We have Sarah Budge from Digital Scotland Superfast Broadband, Charlie Blasco from Fluency, and Angus Ann from Logie Fast Broadband, who's a community project not too far away from my house. So we've had some interesting presentations today, and the idea is to kind of take what we've learned from that and ask some kind of interesting questions about how do we improve things for Scotland, how do we do that in a positive way, rather than kind of focusing on some of the negative kind of comments and some of the difficulties we've had. Obviously, we've got challenges here that are different to other places. We have challenges here that are similar to other places. And it's a case of how do we take those and kind of make them work for us. To start off with, I mean, the first question is to talk about maybe the IX and sort of the geographies in general. We've heard a little bit about Manchester being very successful. We've heard a bit about Cardiff getting up and running. It seems to me like we're a little bit behind there. Not a lot behind, but we're a wee bit behind. I think Manchester has, what, 50 connections? 55 from a population of 2.5 million, whereas we're, what, about 10 in Scotland? For 13, sorry, for a population of 5 million. So we do have some work to do there. And obviously, Manchester is in Scotland, it's not the same thing. But what do we think are the challenges for Scotland in terms of improving connectivity, and how do we catch up with our neighbours? Who wants to kick that off?
We got her. Are we using the mic or not?
The back of the room.
Yeah, so improving connectivity across Scotland is hard, but as I've been talking to a few of the community people here today, the biggest problem with it is backhaul, and the challenge that we have within improving that infrastructure. It's all very well and good BT putting infrastructure into the Highlands or community networks getting built on the West Coast, but how do they get back to a central point or multiple central points? You don't just want to be at one. And I think that middle mile, I think was a term someone used earlier, it's the biggest challenge we've got. I don't know.
What are you defining as the middle mile then?
From, well, the last mile is typically the telephone exchange or the community broadband network or whatever to the customer. The first mile, if you want to use the opposite end of it, is the data center and the internet exchange and the transit providers and all of that stuff. The bit in between, the backhaul, for those guys is the challenge.
Yeah.
And I think the problem that we face is that backhaul is very expensive. As Barry said, dark fiber between Manchester or Lancashire and Glasgow is an expensive thing. The only way to really make that viable is to work together and share resources and things like that. So certainly from a community perspective, that's the way to do it. But the other element is sort of more commercial access providers, and these guys have a fair bit of work to do in utilising the infrastructure that's being put in the ground by BT and by the government and all of that. And there's not at the moment enough local providers facilitating that, and that's a challenge I see.
Mark, can I just add to that and say I'm a local wireless internet service provider. I've got my backhaul coming into Montrose, which is with fibre cabinets. My main backhaul is 12 feet away from the fibre cabinet, 18 inches away from the distribution board. It's technically the shortest phone line in Scotland. Why can't we get fibre to the premises on all fibre connected exchanges? BT seem to be cherry picking a few areas to do fibre to the premises. You can't get fibre to the premises off any fibre cabinet, and that was the promise right at the start that we could. That would go some way to getting us off of ADSL or Ethernet connections, low, low bandwidth Ethernet connections, and up into at least the hundreds of megabits range. Can anyone answer why BT are being less than helpful in that respect?
I can't give a technical answer to that, but I can give some sort of a comment that will give an appreciation to possibly some of the challenges and complexities. The first thing, our programme, which is, I hasten to add, the Digital Scotland Superfast Broadband, is in fact an investment partnership. So it is not Scottish Government buying a network for BT to milk to make profit. It is actually an investment partnership of 410 million, of which BT are actually investing directly 126 million. So that's the subtlety. Secondly, to bear in mind, which is the key piece, which is it's about extending new infrastructure into areas of market failure. In other words, it is not viable for a player to make profit to deliver infrastructure into these areas. So that's the first thing. Secondly, the concept of fibre to the prem. What I would say is the piece about who and how will this be paid for and delivered, and that is a big piece. Certainly, if you look at the investment partnership and the Superfast Broadband programme rollout, there was an open process, and I shan't name the suppliers in question, but one was looking at a fibre to the prem option, and the other one was looking at a mix of solutions. And suffice to say that once we moved into formal ITT, the provider who was looking at fibre to the premises withdrew, because it simply is not viable. It doesn't stack up from a value for money perspective to roll out fibre to the prem across a vast geography. That doesn't obviously address your individual concern.
Can I ask a question? So fibre to the premises is a thing intended for people in their houses to have fast internet access. What the question was really about is a network provider having access to transport services. Now, these are different things. Now, why has the Scottish Government paid, as far as I can see, no attention to access to transport services at places along this way?
Well, what I would say is what we have done as part of an investment partnership is to invest with communications providers to extend their network into areas of market failure. That is what we've done.
Can I ask maybe slightly more, try and focus this in a little bit? So in Scotland, in the Highlands and Islands procurement, which is different from, I think, everywhere else in the UK. Wales might be different, but I think it's different from everywhere else in the UK. There's been public money has gone into the build out of fibre. Now, with the passive infrastructure access, there's always been this problem that it's only available if you're serving residential customers. Now, as I understand it, BT has now, together with Ofcom, gone back to the European Commission and got the fibre access that they will have to provide, because there's public money gone into this fibre, to have the same condition, or rather a similar condition, that says that unless you're a large-scale domestic provider, you cannot avail yourself of the infrastructure access remedy for this fibre that's gone in. Is that right? That we will not have open access to that fibre, which has been not completely, but largely paid for by public money? And given that there's this investment, the gap funding has happened. So as far as BT is concerned, they've paid as much as they would have paid had it been somewhere where they could make a lot of money out of it. The government's paid the rest of it. That's what gap funding means. but what access has the government secured for that gap funding?
Right. Well, what I would say is that the balance of funding is the mixed funding, so private and public sector, is state aid, and through state aid it has to be open access. So
well, no, actually they've appealed that, and Europe has actually, in 2012, Europe actually changed the conditions with Ofcom pressing them to change them, so that, as I understand it, it's not open to everyone. So when you say open access, what do you mean?
Well, I can maybe answer that
yes,
in terms of the
thank
technical perspective. It is technically open access in that everything that BT do is, at a network level, is exposed by Openreach, which is open to all communications providers. However, the semantics of how it's actually being delivered mean that there's challenges involved in accessing it. So, for example, if we had a customer in the middle of that deployment and we wanted to access them as a communications provider, we may not be able to without unbundling an exchange where the handover point is being presented. And those exchanges are spread out across, in HIE's case, they're spread out across the whole deployment. We engaged with BT Wholesale to try and establish whether or not, as an extension of that project within the BT group, they could deliver layer 2 access into an exchange such as Infinex to make a single point where you can access the entire installation. They've not yet come back to say that they're going to do that, although I believe there's now some pressure on them, probably the reasons that you're going through, in that they are being pressured to provide communications providers with a single handover point. That means they don't need to invest too heavily to adopt the infrastructure that's being built out. At the moment, that infrastructure is being built out, but can't be used by anyone other than BT unless they invest heavily. Now, it's not outside the reach of small communications providers, so long as BT are providing a sensibly priced handover location in some sort of small number of locations where you could cheaply buy backhaul, for example, Infinex.
Yeah.
But BT aren't here to talk about that today, so I think it's going to
yes, thank you. And I would just say to make it clear that the reality check is in, you've mentioned backhaul. I mean, currently to date, under the program, there's actually 400 kilometers of new backhaul has been provided. There has been enough spine built out that would take you from Edinburgh to Athens. By the time you have finished the program, there will be enough new infrastructure to take you from Edinburgh to Australia and back. Now, appreciate there are pieces and complexities around the market. There may be some challenges there, but effectively this is the regulated marketplace that prevails across the UK. At a retail point, it is open access and it is a shared investment. I think it's also worthy of saying, coming back to my first point, is that there was only one player who was prepared to make this investment with Scottish Government, the European Union, local authorities and Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and that was actually BT. And without that collaboration, without the programme, then we would not be able to roll out an access network and indeed a massive amount of new backhaul, particularly as Michael showed on the west coast, the new infrastructure that's going to be, and in fact on the note of when that was completed, the 20 subsea cables, the rollout has now finished in terms of getting that infrastructure under the seabed, and there will be an announcement to that effect on Thursday. So it's very easy, I think, to criticise. I would like the assembled company to at least appreciate the scale of the activity that is being done for the benefit of businesses and residents across Scotland. And the other key factor here in terms of utilisation and gap funding, there is a clawback mechanism so that when take-up breaks the 20% mark, then at every single percentage thereafter, there will be reinvestment, direct reinvestment back into the network.
I don't think anyone have any problem with this, what's been done, because that's all great. I think all the people who have an objection to it are the ones who can't access it because they're not BT.
And it's not criticism, it's a question about how will what access will there be and how do you get it?
It's really a question for BT.
Well, no, actually, under the terms of the state aid funding, it's a question for BT UK to publish the terms on which this access will be given. So it's not just BT, it's BT UK who also has to do it. And I presume, therefore, the individual projects within this.
Well, what I would say to that is, again, I'll come back to the point. It is, providing the infrastructure, the marketplace for ISPs, utilising the infrastructure there that is open to all, is regulated.
That's only the retail access. The retail access is regulated, and that's all there. But the question about what access will there be to these pots that are,
Michael, I think.
Yes, I know.
So I think we're talking about two things. Obviously, there's open broadband access at an IP type level, which is what programs are doing. And then there's fundamental access to things like these lines, fibre, hard stuff, which I think is Michael, is what your is
absolutely.
So I think that clarification that the program is delivering a generally access product from Open Reach.
Are you saying that there will be no access to the POPs? Is that what you mean by that?
There will be fibre built out, but that will, that infrastructure will be available as BT grows it, as the latest switches and things that go in. The Rest of Scotland programme, the contract was under the BT UK framework. It's an identical framework across most of the UK. Highlands and Isles, the second one, taken a couple of years in advance of that. And for that reason, that layer 2 access was built into that contract. That's why bits where Highlands Islands layer 2 POPs are, but there are not available in the West of Scotland.
So that is built into the contract?
In Highlands Islands, yes.
Okay.
Good. We're spending too long talking about one thing, which is, it's an important thing, don't get me wrong, but we need to move on to other things. So, are there any other solutions that, sorry?
I was going to ask a question for someone else.
Okay.
Should the government help with the promotion of the IX in Scotland? And if so, what might it be able to do?
What do you want to?
Yeah.
The promotion of the IX in Scotland.
Maybe it's one for Charlie.
Yeah, well.
Yes, it's probably the answer.
I've said this publicly before. I think government involvement with internet exchanges is a very dangerous and carefully played game. Yes, it's great to have help from government in terms of supporting it. Trying to push people one way or the other is very much the wrong thing to do. We have had help from the government so far in getting the exchange live. I mean, in the very early days, Clive was instrumental in putting events together and everything else. That's exactly the sort of help we need. And in fact, it's more of the evangelizing sales pitch in terms of the success of the internet exchange than anything else. Mandating it or any other thing that a government might be able to do probably isn't the right thing. And actually, what they should be doing is doing events like this and getting the word out and making sure that all the big stakeholders are aware of what's going on and that they understand the responsibility to join.
Can I suggest that it would make sense as the government as a content provider to peer into the IX so that
the government is hosted by some of the companies that are already peering.
Well, precisely,
yeah. So
I think you'll find most of them. Well, up to a certain point, I think a lot of it was with Watson.
Yeah.
So they're on the exchange. So
it wasn't clear from your answer.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, getting away from the whole kind of like, we'll get sort of BT to kind of do a lot for us. Is there any kind of aspirations or interest in doing this yourself? I know, Angus, you guys at Logate have done quite a bit yourselves in terms of, the Blackhall problem there has been solved by help from the university. Is there anything you could add in terms of other ways of dealing with these problems and other ways of getting communities connected?
I don't know about other ways, but we're at the other end of the spectrum in relation to everything we've talked about so far. We're a very small community. We're thinly spread. So you don't have to be physically remote to be in a point of market failure. And that's where we realized we were. But we've been privileged to have a dialogue with Stirling University and make a backhaul connection through the super channel. What might concern me is the medium to long-term stability of that arrangement. Because as I understand it, the governance arrangements for super channel and what we're called the metropolitan area networks, the MANs in Scotland, are evolving and changing. And I'm not quite sure where all of that's going to end up in terms of the sort of operation we have, which is pretty small scale, but very much at the cheap and cheerful end of the kind of enterprises you're talking about today.
And I mean, Blairlogie's been a sort of big success. I know there's more work to be done there in terms of getting more subscribers on, but you know, you've got a network that's up and running, which kind of puts you ahead of some of the other people out there.
It works. It's on wireless. We have, frankly, 12 subscribers at the moment. We're going to spread it out across the next month. We're aiming for a target of 50. That's pretty small beer compared with some other operations. But we're very fortunate. I would say if you're doing anything like this, the landowners are so important. And it's not just about land. Landowners include farmers. Farmers never throw anything away. So you get telegraph poles, metal poles, all kinds of things. And they have machines that can move telegraph poles around. So, you know, they're really quite important as part of your group if you're getting something like this totally off the ground.
Yeah. In terms of kind of making these things happen elsewhere, because there are things happening outside of Blairlogie, you know, some stuff on the West Coast and stuff like Will's been talking about, which is great. You know, is there any way, you know, we can expand that to cover more communities? Because obviously that's one of the things that works well, is getting the communities out there and getting them to do it themselves. I mean, Mark, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, our Community Broadband Scotland's role is to help communities get connected to faster, better, hopefully next generation broadband. To date, we've funded 7 communities, including Blairlogie, with just over 1,000 potential connections. Though all of those communities have had one thing in common, or a couple of things in common, but mainly they've had somebody like Angus in the community who's passionate, who's a driver. I think 6 out of 7 of them, if not 7 out of 7 of them, have had the support of Hubs and Will's team. You know, they have been very, very hands-on. And there's lots of communities that are prepared to be hands-on, and there are some that aren't prepared and willing to be so hands-on at the moment. So the challenge is, and this goes back to the kind of the middle haul, the challenge is creating the scale to be able to access that middle haul connection. At the moment, we're working through a pilot project in the Argyll Isles, which is not as big as your project yet, but it's 1,500 premises, 3,000 people across 7 islands, 7 different communities. It's a community-driven scheme, and that's of the scale where we've got good market interest. We're in the middle of procurement at the moment, and we've taken a number of vendors through to competitive dialogue phase. And the aspiration of that project is to bring next generation broadband to these 7 very remote islands. And so the challenges of aggregation. This brings us back to the thorny issue which Will mentioned earlier of double funding, and you know, identifying those premises that we can fund, because, you know, as a taxpayer, I don't want my premise to be funded by Sarah's scheme and by my scheme for the same result. So we do need to pay attention to this, to the double funding challenge. However, with, you know, in the Argyll Isles, we've worked very closely with the Highlands Alliance Enterprise team. It's in the Highlands Alliance area, and with BT to identify. So that area has been identified, it has been agreed. There's an agreement to de-scope once a solution is in place. And we have in the pipeline, we have 6 or 7, depending on how we cut them, other aggregated schemes with a potential 9,000 connections that once, by the end of this year, we'll know what the solution looks like for Argyll Isles, and we'll be ready to roll with those at the beginning of next year. In the meantime, we do continue, and we've got, you know, 4 or 5 that are going through approval now. We're working with 60 different communities. We still very much want to work with Hubs, with the small communities. We're working with Hubs to see how we can help in the West Coast, bring those communities together to access better middle haul. So there's lots that can be done. There's lots that we are doing at the moment.
Sorry. Hi, my name is Corrado. One thing that I noticed today is that we are missing one of the great players in community communication, SSE. It's not present in this panel, it's not present here. They have quite a large network, fibre throughout Scotland, and they are using most of that for themselves. But they also sell that. If you go at any event like, I don't know, Convergence Summit North, they were present there to offer their connectivity solutions, any type, but SSE is not involved in this process.
Charlie, I know you do quite business with SSE.
Yeah,
Can you talk about that?
Their network, as is others, is 100% available. I mean, they sell capacity to service providers like us. I think the problem that we've got is that guys like SSE and Geo and all these fiber operators and even OpenReach at the level that maybe needs to be accessible is unaccessible to a lot of the community networks, and that's partially because of a cost barrier, and partially because there's also this almost dogma in who is a communications provider in Ofcom and BT's eyes, and SSE's and everyone else's. You're a communications provider, you have customers that buy communication services off you, as do all the community networks. They are all communications providers, but it's at what level do you exist within that ecosystem? SSE and BT are the guys who physically own the fibre, and they're the guys with the crown jewels. And the layers above that, unfortunately, community networks and small companies are quite a distance away from accessing those assets.
I don't know if I agree with that. We've spoken quite a lot with SSE and with Network Rail a lot also, who's in fact building quite a big fibre network, and they're perfectly prepared to, they just don't happen to have fibre where we need it, but they're perfectly prepared to work with us.
I think the problem that a lot of people come up to is cost. I mean, the difficulty with rural broadband specifically is you need to get fibre to a very specific location, and that, while it's maybe within the realms of certain communications providers, most are very unwilling to sell you a pair of fibres unless they are selling you dark fibre. And the cost of dark fibre is an inordinate amount higher than an Ethernet circuit or something like that. So if you need fibre to the middle of nowhere, there may be fibre there. There may be going through the duct under your feet, but getting them to actually break it there, put a point of presence in, and hand some off to you, they're never going to do that. They're never going to go and spend tens of thousands of pounds building a point of presence with DWDM equipment just because you want to buy 100 meg or a gig service. The only option to a lot of communications providers in rural places is dark fibre, and the cost is a lot higher because the asset that they have there is limited. They only have 96 cores in their fibre bundle going from A to B. If they're going to sell you one or two of them, there's a high cost in that.
The other thing that you can look at though in terms of backhaul is fibre, is wireless relay. I know that Amanda, that's something you've talked about before in the past, and rather than having fibre run at certain cost and having it looked after by a big telecoms company who have to helicopter people in to fix things because they're up a hill somewhere, why not put wireless base stations in hills and fields and all the rest of it, and link them all up together and string your backhaul that way, and that way you have a network that's open because other people have access to it because it's a community-based thing, and also you're not having to pay £3,000 to get somebody in a helicopter up to fix a mast or whatever it is that's going on.
I think radio relay is massively underused at the moment, where it could be a big piece of infrastructure. I think people are a little bit wary of using it extensively. Mobile operators have been doing it for years very successfully.
Yes.
I think the rest of us
using it in a small way in the rural game. It's working really well.
Perfect.
I think there's actually a gap here. The mobile operators have been using it massively, and small, tiny little community networks have been using it very successfully. And I think everyone in between, the national network operators, have yet to wake up to the idea that that might be an option.
Well, like I said, it might not be the best people to do that because they've got costs and issues with access that. And also, if you turn up to a farmer and say, "Hi, I'm your neighbour. I'd like to put a mast in your field," they'll go, "Okay." and can I get some fast broadband, please? Where if you turn up in your BT and they say, they'll say, well, how many knots are you going to put on the check? You know, because that's what they're used to dealing with the mobile operators as well. So there's lots of different reasons why, you know, fibre might not be the only solution. I mean, I think it's definitely a solution, and it's part of the how we deal with this, but it can't be the only one.
A very useful thing that the Scottish Government could do is look at getting Ofcom to adjust some of the rules for other bits of spectrum in rural places in Scotland, where the rules are designed really for other circumstances.
Such as?
Well, you know, when you want to license spectrum in the middle of a big city is very different from.
No, I mean which frequencies? You're talking about which ranges? They're not specific.
Well, we can go into detail, but you know, relatively low, so you get good propagation. So you know, your 4 gigahertz, 6 gigahertz, kind of collides. Well, details to be worked out. But
Who the hell is using that in the Western Isles? But it's, in other words, who's got that spectrum? And who could conceivably object to its use?
BT.
Well, so BT is sitting on it.
BT, but the other challenge, I assume, makes the equipment. It's very refined spectrum. But BT's spectrum UK.
Okay. We're getting close to time, I think. So okay. We'll speak
One observation. I have inquired with Arqiva. Arqiva is the company that manages the masts for digital TV.
Mm-hmm.
They are willing to post wireless bridges between places. They are willing to lease space in the masts if we want to create a wireless network in places that are not available.
Okay.
And another point, SSE is quite a responsible employer and a socially responsible company. They just announced they are giving everybody the living wage. So that might be another key to open the door for SSE to.
I think the carriers do have a bit of some responsibility to make sure their networks are available to the people who need them most. But there's problems in doing that, in that they cause a competitive problem for guys like Vodafone and O2 and everyone else who's buying their assets at competitive rates and struggle to make these things pay their way. But yeah, I think there is probably an argument for the carriers to be a bit more responsible and provide access to their networks in a way that allows for the challenging terrain of Scotland to be covered, where otherwise it would be out of the reach of a lot of providers for cost reasons.
Jim.
Hi, Jim Reid. I've got a question which is not so much about the community broadband stuff for the people in the remote areas of Scotland. Obviously, the concerns are going to be greatest here. I live in the suburbs of Glasgow, but not in the city itself. I can't get high-speed internet access where I live. It's not possible to get fibre. There's fibre up the main street, 50 metres away from where I live, but the cable companies for the viaduct the village say, not coming down the street, there are houses here, have a nice day. There's fibre to the cabinet, again it's 50 metres away, but I can't get any fibre from there to my house or anywhere down the street where I live. And even if I could get fibre, who's going to do the backhaul from there?
I'd actually speak to one of your neighbours and buy a pair of Ubiquity devices.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Well, at least you start to start your own community project.
You're back on it. Yeah. Awful.
But
with any consolation, Cheltenham is host to a large government communications organisation, and three-quarters of the areas in Cheltenham will never get fibre either.
That's because they don't need it to get all the.
I didn't tell you that.
As a wireless enthusiast, I would just say don't get obsessed about fibre. If you're that close to a street cabinet or an exchange, you'll get perfectly good service over copper.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, something we've been doing in Edinburgh. I mean, you can't get fibre in the Rose Street Exchange area of Edinburgh. Don't know why. They completely missed the exchange off the list for whatever reason. Rose Street Exchange has no plans for fibre to the cabinet. I mean, this is a central, and Glasgow Central Exchange is exactly the same. No plans for fibre to the cabinet. So, I mean, unfortunately, there are people who live on the fringes of that exchange where copper on an ADSL connection is getting them sod off. And they're having to build local community networks. I mean, East Lothian is another one of these places that community networks are being built in metropolitan areas.
And community networks don't necessarily mean rural. Yeah,
No.
That's where a lot of them have been because they've had to. But there's no reason why you can't do that in the conurbations as well if you feel there's a demand.
I want to make that exact point. There are a couple of links members that I'm aware of, and there might be more, where they've been addressing exactly what you've just been talking about. The one I'm thinking of is in Italy, where it's actually in the northeast, possibly the richest part of Italy, and yet they've managed to develop a really, quite a large wireless-based ISP. And the problem there is that something like 70% only 70% of Italian homes can be reached by DSL. So there is a big gap to be bridged, and so it's spawned a little industry. Maybe there's an opportunity to try and get some of those people over to talk in a similar sort of meeting to this. I happen to know in their case that they got frustrated about the point that was made earlier about equipment, that finding and buying specialist equipment that just works like that proved to be a lot more difficult than they thought. So they actually got into the business of buying the motherboards and then doing the adaptations themselves in order to get, but they rolled this out over a significant scale now, so maybe there's experience to share there. And I was also thinking about, I think is it Metronet, who specialise in wireless in Manchester. And you would have thought there was a gap there, but actually it turns out there is, and they've particularly focused on the business use side of things, but it's actually addressing all these kind of frustrations that keep coming up here. Maybe we just need a bit more, because most of these companies don't see a competitive aspect to it. In some sense, they're enriched if more people use the technology that they're using, because they're never going to come and do it in Scotland. But in fact, if there's a take-up in Scotland, it's good for business generally. So maybe what we need to do is tease some more of that case study evidence out, so that people are aware of it.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot to learn from other places and how they're doing things. Not just going to try and kind of, as a Scottish race, it's trying to knock down the wall with a toffee hammer, it's just not going to happen.
Again, community building seems to me to be the key to some of this as well.
It's not the only solution.
No, I realise, but I mean community building in the sense of network engineers talking to each other. I understand in Italy that there's a wireless ISP trade association with about 50 members. I mean, I don't think it's from what I've heard, there's some downsides of it as well. It's not exactly a model operation, but it shows you that there turns out to be a lot of wireless operators in Italy, much more than anyone suspected, and maybe it's teasing out those kinds of things as well.
And that's something we definitely got to do. It's not just
the problem there is bureaucracy, more than that. Yeah,
and not just sort of technical networks, but also networks of people as well and sharing experience and stuff. Like we've had interesting challenges, where the signal was great until the leaves came out of the trees, and then all of a sudden it's dropped off. Now I'm sure that's a problem that's been solved elsewhere by other people at some point. But yeah, like chainsaw conservation dollars. So that's good. They don't tend to like that very much. So well, just by being in this room, we've learned some ways of fixing that. But that kind of thing, which is massively helpful and means you can solve these problems together as opposed to having to sit there scratching your head wondering kind of where it all went wrong. So.
If I can add two last points, and then I will shut up for the line. Firstly, there seems to be this disconnection between BT Openreach in particular's rollout plans for fibre and the areas it deems commercial and not, and what we like to call a reality. Yeah, I can understand why rural Aberdeenshire, being the second richest area in the UK, and 99% employment and 200 yards away from a fibre line, I can see why BT doesn't see that as being economic. That's just stupidity. But for Rose Street to be turned around and marked as uneconomic is just insane. Now, it would be nice if the Scottish Government were to say, we've just given you 350 million quid, which is like 10 hospitals or 10 schools or whatever. We'd actually like to see the process in which you've picked these places and perhaps take the dart out of the dartboard again and run through it again in a slightly more logical manner. But I'm just praying for that. The second thing is observation from Holland, and that is Holland, as we well know, is a very flat country, a bit cheese obsessed, lovely people, very tall, but very technologically driven. So the Dutch government 5 or 10 years ago said, look, do you want a fibre connection to your house? And all my mates in the IT sector at home went, yeah, well, give me €100, I'll put you on the list. And they're actually getting fibre to the premises per house, being rolled out in Holland last year, this year, next year. So a friend of mine's paying €35 a month for a 300 meg up and 300 meg down connection, and she wonders how the hell I can get by on 0.25 meg, and so do I. Now, if, as Nicola Sturgeon said today in the news, we want Scotland to be successful, then why don't we start by fixing the internet? Maybe in a small way, by maybe asking BT to be a bit more logical, and maybe in a big way by saying, well, no, hang on a second, we've actually got to move fibre to the premises. If you look at the new town beside Aberdeen, Brigadoon, that they're building, all 3,000 houses will have fibre to the premises. So BT can do it. Yeah, it's not a question of cost. All those houses sold within 12 hours.
Having worked in some ISPs and stuff in the past, when it comes to providing access networks, and I can't speak for BT because I don't work for them and never have done, not planning to. But the whole point of access networks is you need scale. Yeah, and you're talking about rural Aberdeen and places like Rose Street where there are businesses and there are people with lots of money, but there's not the same scale that you'll get in, say, Granton, where there's not quite so much in the way of affluence and that kind of thing. But there's a lot of houses and they all want broadband.
Yeah, and they're all willing to pay for it as well.
Yes.
Yeah. There was a similar problem in the City of London where BT wasn't rolling out fibre. And do you know why? Because some years ago, because of some of our Irish friends who were blowing things up, somebody decided it would be a good idea if they removed the BT cabinets, which might have been a target. So the nice people in the City of London got together and found all basements that had space in them to put new cabinets in, and they are gradually in the process of putting that in. There's a lot of community effort has to be done. And what I didn't hear at all this afternoon is a business case for large businesses to get involved in the IX project. They've subcontracted all this. This is all outsourced to Verizon and BT Global. And they don't care who does the network. Someone else.
Anybody else?
To sum up, we need to throw up those roofs. Yeah, that's part
of the solution.
Yeah,
part.
If I can be purely cynical about BT, if you look at the BT Rose Street Exchange, it connects a huge amount of businesses via these lines. These lines are margin rich. Why would you change it? On a commercial.
Did anybody here put a submission into Ofcom on the just post consultation on business access?
Yeah.
So that's the one that does the leased lines. So you didn't ask Ofcom to regulate leased line.
We didn't know.
The leased line market is.
That's the second round of the consultation. The first one was in the spring. So that's how you would get access to a network.
The leased line market is pretty open and pretty saturated. Well, in city centres, in city centres, it's
There's
pretty.
about one operator in the whole United Kingdom that leases dark fibre.
Well, yeah,
and that's Geo.
That was the point I was coming
Find
to.
another one that leases dark fibre.
The point I was coming to. If you look at the if you look at
full open access and shit.
If you look at the market in terms of lease line, which is essentially now Ethernet delivery, there's plenty of people you can buy national Ethernet from.
Yeah, I'm not go below that.
Well, that was my point. And the problem both in the access and in the middle mile bit at the moment is that Openreach aren't being regulated in selling the access to the raw fibre. You go and get into a telephone exchange and you think you're getting access to the network assets that
The
leave that
interesting
exchange.
thing is the state aid rules are unbalanced. BT got a lot of state aid, but they were not obliged to make available dark fibre. They were allowed to get away with Vulu and GA. If Barn took money out of state aid, we'd be obliged to make dark fibre available to anybody who wants it. That's part of the state aid requirements. So somebody has not got that balance right.
Well, BT think that
regulate us.
they think that they've resolved the problem by doing duct and pole sharing. So duct and pole sharing is one level below that, where they're actually allowing you to lease access into their ducts and their poles.
You can't use it for business services.
Well, you can use it for next generation access. So as a service provider,
not for business services and not for backhaul. You can only use it for distribution.
You can use it for access distribution. Yeah, that's
why
idea.
Fujitsu had to pull out of the deal. They couldn't get a workable model using PIA.
But my point being that that's how they're getting around the argument. It may not be right and it needs to be readdressed, but they're getting around the argument by saying, well, you don't need to lease our dark fibre. We have our own product set that sits on top of our fibre. If you want access to fibre, well, put the fibre in yourself. You can have access to our ducts and poles. Now, okay, that only works for the access network and the metropolitan access network. It's useless for guys like you sitting in Lancashire wanting dark fibre from here and to here. But that's the argument they've used today.
PIA also costs us about 10 times as much as building our own.
Yeah. Well, you need a BT man standing over your shoulder to make sure that you're doing everything correctly.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Richard.
Nice to meet you, sir.
Yes.
Okay, so just to reassure you, we've slightly put back the time of these the transport to take us to the social. I reckon we can wrap this up easily in the next 20-25 minutes. I want to do a very quick presentation about links with your indulgence. Is that okay with everybody? And then I think there are some closing remarks and some questions I want to ask and just get a gauge from the room about what you'd like to do next. So Mark, if you could set up the last slide set.
Sorry, John, I have to zoom off.
If
I've
you-
got a train at 6 and waiting, so I better keep
Yeah,
going.
if you have to go, don't stand on ceremony. Let me just test, while we're waiting for the slides to come, let me just test the appetite of the room. If we were to do this again, I mean, I think probably the lesson we learned from this is to maybe be a bit more expansive about the room that we go for. If we were to do this again and we were to try and pick up on some of the things that have come out today, would you be interested in coming to such a meeting? Yeah. We have a mailing list. It's very quiet. Our mailing lists are a little bit out of fashion these days. Some of the discussions that have taken place could move on to that list. I mean, we've got a capture of this session now, so we can look back through it and pick up on certainly some of the salient points that just came out of that panel discussion. Would there be some appetite to perhaps see if there were things that could be said on the list? Those in favour? A bit less of an appetite for that. I mean, maybe we should reflect in the general discussion that will happen at the social event, see what ideas flow from that. Jim?
John, just make a suggestion, why don't we set up a mailing list based on the attendees that are here today? A general discussion about internet developments in Scotland, perhaps with a focus on community broadband, see who bites with that.
Yeah, I can certainly offer it, and we have one more general mailing list already, but I'll certainly pick up on that point, Jim. See if you could.
John, the topic said around the panel session overlaps with what you will also hear at INCA. I don't know what your relationship with INCA, but INCA is going to have an event in Aberdeen in February.
Yep.
So there's just.
We're already talking to them about that. I mean, I think.
You have common interest, and you have mutual. It would be danger of diluting it by having too many events.
I agree. I think our initial thought is to cross-promote and to keep talking about where these discussions should take place. Links is by no means trying to kidnap this. I think that obviously there's a context in terms of the future of the exchange that means we have to keep some of it going there. But I certainly don't want to try and compromise anyone else's discussions on the same subject.
But compromise each other, I think.
There is that risk. I think Aberdeen is anyway a big question on our future horizon. So working out what we should do about that. I mean, my own view is that it's beyond any definition of metro internet exchange. So the idea of linking South Kyle to Aberdeen as an internet exchange doesn't seem at the moment that appealing. There aren't many exchanges that have got really long reach within them. In fact, probably the Links one in London has got the longest single fibre reach between the furthest distant nodes. It's about 70 kilometres. I think the conventional wisdom is if you start to go beyond that, then it's looking a bit different. Anyway, let me quickly run through this, and then I'll give scope for last remarks and questions at the end. So I'm going to do this really fast. It's a general links update. First thing to notice is that we're 20 years old. In fact, this is our 20-year-old year, so we're just coming exhaustively towards the end of it. We've had a few parties in London, and it's been a great experience, and people have helped us celebrate that. When I'm doing these things, I usually pull up something that's on homepage of our current website, although we're actually planning to change that at the moment, but it's a way of capturing the essence of what's going on at Links. There's some really interesting numbers in there. For example, we've got 10 member-facing 100 gig ports already, and there's quite a few more in servicing at the moment. So the transition to 100 gig really is happening, and I'll pick up again on that in a minute. I'll talk first of all about the peering side of the house. I keep reusing that. Nobody's laughing. So Scotland first, we're up to 13 networks, and there are some more to come in the immediate future. From a reliability point of view, it's been fantastic. We've had pretty much 100% uptime ever since it was launched. But as you can see, the traffic is still a little bit of a disappointment. And we've, some of what we've been saying today goes to the effort we're going to have to put in to improve that. Links in London goes from strength to strength. It's actually been a bit of a heavy re-engineering year. Again, just to get back to that 100 gig story, we've got a 6 by 100 gig trunk in the core of the network now at 2 in fact. So you can see the strength and the power that we've had to build there to cope with all the traffic. We're actually just building the 11th POP there, and we've gone quite outside our normal heartland area, which is into Chessington. Again, the definitions of London are interesting in that context. Reliability at Links this year has been really good. I reported almost 5 nines at the most recent quarterly meeting. And the other thing that's rather a hidden gem in London is the massive amount of PI traffic. We reckon we're managing a lot more peak traffic on a private, purely optical network than we are on the public exchange, which means that it's peaking now at around 5 terabits a second, which is a truly frightening number. Manchester's going pretty well. I think we're quite pleased that since it's only 2.5 years that the maturity level that's reached. And I think this is the aspirational case that IXScotland can do a lot better. Although having said that, Manchester's had a long tradition of peering stretching back, I guess nearly 15 years now. So that's a factor in this. Reliability has been good there, and actually that graph doesn't really show it too well, but there has been an increase in traffic since Akamai and the BBC joined relatively recently, but that is relatively recent news. Cardiff, we're just in the process of launching. It's actually been physically built and package flowing very shortly. Very curious thing going on there because it's actually built inside BT Stadium House in Cardiff. There are no independent or no realistic independent data centres there. So we provided a sort of carrier neutral zone within Stadium House to make that practical. So members can buy rack space from Links and not have to deal with BT. There may be some ideas that we can steal from this, which we can apply in the other regional exchanges that we're building, and again, that's something the steering committee will focus on. We've also got an exchange in North America. It's quite a long story, so I won't try and tell it today. We've actually built 3 POPs already in the North Virginia area. This is actually the core area where an awful lot of North American internet traffic is exchanged. And briefly, we're doing that because we believe our model is the best model. And OpenIX, which is a movement in the United States that's trying to push for better connectivity. Ironically, they have all their problems and concerns, particularly data centers that are essentially closed and wanting to connect with other data centers. They invited us to do something there, and we become one of the first organizations to be certified for that. So that's a really quick buzz through the peering side of what's going on in London, but I did promise that we would talk a little bit about our public affairs work, and that's actually trickier for me to do especially. The key there is to first of all understand that Links has a dual mission, and over the years our mission has been refined by the membership to what it is today. And I guess you could say very clearly in the early days that the facilitate traffic bit was always there, but wasn't quite worded the way it is now. Especially through public peering notes that in fact we actually provide a lot of private peering opportunity as well. But the second point has become to almost equal prominence to represent the interests of our members in matters of public policy. Managed to mess up that slide without even realising it. Apologies.
Worth saying twice.
Yes. And we've come to the view, actually, that you can't do one without the other. And it's interesting how a lot of other internet exchanges, when we first said that loudly and clearly, said they didn't agree with us and thought that we were perhaps extending our reach into being something that wasn't an internet exchange and looked a bit more like a trade association. What's quite fascinating to observe is that quite a number of internet exchanges now employ full-time public policy officers, because they've realised the same thing, that it's almost impossible to operate without taking an interest in all the various pressures that come to bear upon either you as an exchange or the integral part of the exchange, which in our case is the membership. And as the slide said, Links is a mutually owned organisation, so these are values representing the membership as a whole, not what the staff think. So over the years, we've gradually built a public affairs department. It's getting bigger and bigger from tiny origins. And the head of that department is a man called Malcolm Hutty, who you see on this slide. I'm very proud of this slide. It was actually during the controversy over the draft communications bill, the one that was actually dropped. And what you see there is Malcolm in the suit on this side, and Jimmy Wales from Wikipedia on the other side. And they were in good cop, bad cop mode that particular day. Jimmy Wales was so amazingly over the top, fixed bayonet charge, that Malcolm could actually be slightly softer and slightly more subtle. Our evidence, this is Links' evidence, the Links membership evidence, had an integral role in the killing of this bill, which we believe to be completely disproportionate, and we said so. And when the Select Committee finally published their report on the draft bill, Links' evidence was cited no less than 13 times in the report, and indeed our evidence was cited more than anyone else. We had to work extremely hard to get the network operator point of view understood about this, and I'm very proud of that particular thing. Of course, it comes back to haunt you. These next couple of slides are taken from what currently looks a little bit different on our website. It's the public affairs part. It's largely a blog which Malcolm and his staff maintain. And the idea there is to provide a sort of proxy service to members who can't afford to employ full-time or specialist regulatory affairs staff. And of course, if you're a small ISP, that's an almost impossible burden to try and conceive that. We long ago noted that the attitude of a lot of our smaller members was to literally hide underneath the stone and hope that the world wasn't happening. And of course, these days, that's hardly a tenable strategy. So what the staff try to do with this is to keep you up to date with what's going on. And it's not just a passive service like that, though. Every time there is any really threatening legislation, whether it's at national level or even at supranational level, say from the EU, our role is to try and collect what our members really think about that. And these consultation exercises are managed very thoroughly now. I think something like 100 members contributed to the submissions we made over the bill that was killed that I just mentioned. But as you see, it keeps coming back. It's very topical in the news at the moment. And so, as you can imagine, it's a real focus of staff activity. But it's sort of never ending, and the industry comes under pressure in all sorts of ways. It isn't necessarily always legislative. All manner of other kinds of pressure are put on the industry, and most of it is not only not benign, but it implies work and cost to networks that the government just simply doesn't see. And so I don't want to paint too black a picture, but just even understanding some of this is crucially important, and the networking that goes on between our public affairs staff and the equivalent public affairs staff of our members is great to behold, and makes a huge difference. There are times when network operators don't want to actually be the person giving the message back that perhaps this isn't such a good thing to do, and I think they've become well used over time to Links being able to play that role collectively for them. We don't do this exclusively. We very much believe in partnerships and alliance building in this space. So we'll work with anybody reasonably who holds a similar point of view and tries to express the point of view of the network operators. So in the UK, we work closely with ISPA. In Europe, we work with Eurospa, and internationally, we work with IXScotland very closely. And then the thing that's become pretty dominant in this space in recent weeks, again, it depends on just look to the slightly, depends on what you've been following, but there was a plenipotentiary conference in South Korea of the ITU, and all manner of bizarre things were being suggested there. I don't think I'm going too strong in using that word. There is a sort of coalition of countries where you certainly wouldn't want to go on holiday, like North Korea and so on, who would happily turn the clock back and try to turn the internet into something where it's more like a sender-pays telecommunications model. This tends to be picked up by other governments, and Russia, and amazingly some of the South American countries seem to form into unholy alliances over these kinds of things, because they believe that it is the role of government to absolutely control the internet. Malcolm was part of the British delegation that went there, so I think that illustrates that we don't just try to have an adversarial relationship with our own government. We are happy to collaborate with them when there's a mutual interest. And the reports back of what actually went on at this conference were particularly Byzantine. I guess you have to be a sort of policy geek to want to know about this stuff in great detail, but suffice to say that most of the craziest measures that were being suggested there were squatted on. It took, again, rather interesting collections of people getting together and actually understanding what common interest is to do that. So that's an incredibly quick canter through a complex subject, and links his work in the public affairs side. My pledge to IXScotland and what we might do in future community meetings like this is that we want that to be an integral part of what we do. There is a note of caution, and that is that we established a very long time ago that it would be very dangerous for links to be involved directly in telecommunications policy. And the reason for that, of course, is that since nearly all the telecommunications companies are members of links, we could easily rip ourselves apart in trying to discuss such things. So we tend to not be involved directly in the telecommunications policy as it bears on, for example, how BT was privatised and all the things that have gone since. So ironically, our relationship directly with Oftel is rather slender. And it did occur to me when you were talking earlier in that panel session that perhaps a good idea would be to have an Oftel person, dare I say it, bound and gagged in the corner, listening to this discussion for educational purposes. Did I say Oftel? Sorry, I went back down memory lane for some bizarre reason, not in a good way. So maybe there's a role there, because if what's actually going on is a misunderstanding, then that is actually front and centre to what our public affairs departments do. So I hope I've explained that, again, sort of touching on quite a lot of complexity sufficiently quickly. That's it. So I said I'd be quick. If there are any general questions about links stimulated by what I've just said, again, on another occasion, perhaps we'll try and do that a bit less breathlessly, but I'm happy to answer any general questions now. It's the end of a long day, isn't it? How do you feel about this? Was this a good thing for us to attempt?
Yes.
Yeah, should keep doing it. I think we felt this time that we struggled to get the message out. So the take up on registration, for example, was a little slow, and that alarmed us. I mean, not that we worried about getting into risk and things like that. Again, the university have been very supportive in that respect. We eventually, the steering committee put a lot of effort into trying to understand the various channels where we might put out notices that such a thing happened. We'd be quite interested in feedback about that. So if you learned about this in an unusual way, or you think that we're missing a trick in not being able to publicise such an event, then please drop us a line. You can do that privately to me if you don't want to do it on a mailing list. So I think as I try and wrap things up then, it seems to me that you quite like the idea that we continue to tiger away at some of these rather thorny issues of connectivity in Scotland, particularly, on issues that didn't really get resolved today. Are there things that we could do better? Are there lessons that can be learned from other countries or activities elsewhere in the UK? I'm very grateful to Barry coming today. I think Varn are going to play a key role in showing that things can be done, and eventually if you just bang your head against some of these obstacles, you can get through them. In the same way that I think William did in talking about the more specific, the issues that are more specific to Scotland. So I pledge that we will do that. I think one of the benefits that comes out of days like this is more what's about to happen in the social interaction. So please take the opportunity to talk to Link staff if you want to. There's a bunch of us here, and there are quite a few members of the steering committee here as well. So please feel free to sort of engage with them if you've got ideas or criticisms or anything else that perhaps you don't want to say in a public forum. I don't want to just be having the last word. So is there anyone else that has a comment they'd like to make now or final remarks? No. Oh.
Yeah, that's the one. Maybe it's just my understanding of the role of commercial changes and so on. But I found the agenda a wee bit kind of dived off into community broadband stuff, which I just wasn't sure how that fitted with what you're doing, and that's quite a wide spectrum of issues there. And as I think Patrick mentioned, there are other avenues for community broadband stuff to be discussed. I'm just wondering, is it a good idea to combine that with this, or should this format be more around like what it's doing?
Well, the idea that really came up was the panel session, and I think maybe the panel did get overly dominated by talking about community broadband side of things. The original premise was, why aren't we getting a lot of connections? And then the observation that connectivity in Scotland appears to be a little different from what we're used to, and certainly what's more freely available in England. And then there was a sort of inevitability to, okay, how does that agenda open up? I mean, I personally, I was quite pleased with the job that Richard did in trying to expose some of those issues, because I knew it wasn't going to be easy. And as you can imagine, behind the scenes, we'd have discussions about who was going to be here, who accepted invitations to be here, and perhaps who was a little bit more reluctant to accept invitations to be here. And some of those things are quite difficult to talk about, especially from the platform. But no, I can assure you, there's no attempt on Link's part to somehow kidnap that space or claim it as his own or anything like that. I think, on the other hand, we made a pledge right from the very beginning that we would try and be supportive of community broadband initiatives, because if you remember what I said about the rather tragic aggregation of the ISP market in the UK, frankly, if someone doesn't support them, how are they going to succeed? And I think Link has always taken a very open-handed approach to that. I'd like to think that there are more ISPs still alive in the UK generally because we exist than there probably would be if we didn't exist, or if we existed as a commercial organisation, as sometimes occurs in the world where the Internet Exchange is not a membership-based body. But it's a fine line to draw.
John, just another point on the agenda for today. We did try to have somebody, we wanted to get somebody here from one of the content delivery provider networks to come, but for a variety of logistical reasons it wasn't possible to do that. So there could have been a broader scope to today's meeting that actually turned out. We had quite a fairly big position in community broadband, but that wasn't, if you like, the only design of what we're trying to do here today. But there's some other practical issues made it impractical for other folk who wanted to come to actually be here in Edinburgh today.
Watching the audience, when Barry and William spoke, there was a lot of rapt attention. I can't help feeling that even though we came upon that idea rather late, that seemed to work fairly well in terms of understanding just what can be done when people are determined enough. But maybe I'm misreading that.
From my point of view, supporting community broadband projects is instrumental to the success of IXScotland, because if we don't have the traffic, if we don't have the requirement for better connectivity, IXScotland could fizzle and die out. We need to support that.
It's not going to fizzle and die out because we're going to give it support. I mean, I think if the Links board were to look at this in 5 years' time and see literally what we see today, they're going to be disappointed, and they're going to say, you know, is this worth continuing with? But there's no desire in the short term to make the kind of decisions that would happen in a commercial organisation, where they would say, you know, that doesn't seem to be a return on investment, let's kill it. We're in a very fortunate position that we can take that long-term view, and we feel it's our duty to take that long-term view, so that's what we're going to do. I think the only thing that disappointed me, to be honest, what I heard, was just how small the scale of it was. I had in my head that since Scotland is a very large country with a very small population relative to England, that there would perhaps be more of these initiatives and more going on than I thought. I mean, it seems to me that if you look at the entire size of the Western Isles, you know, you're going to wait a long time before conventional DSL becomes available to those inhabitants. Now, perhaps the population of the Western Isles isn't that big, but they seem to elect an MP to Westminster, so the constituency can't be that small. But I did feel. Is it in the whole of the Western Isles? Yeah. Maybe I just had that wrong then. But I mean, we were hearing of scale that was considerably smaller than that in terms of existing initiatives.
Yeah, I was like Andrew, surprised that the agenda got that wide, and particularly on the connectivity. And to be frank with you, as someone's been in touch with me a long time, it was very confusing. I'm not sure that people go away from here any better informed, probably less. What I would like to have seen, if you're thinking that the adoption of the IX is going to be done by demand, then it's not the connecting of the place or the premises, it's the people we need to drive up. And demand stimulation and digital adoption are the two bigger things that we can have control upon. And you mentioned Glasgow. Glasgow's actually got pretty heavy density of 40 mil in Bothwell, but the riches of Bothwell. But in many places, it doesn't have take-up. So you've got to look at that as to how we stimulate and drive take-up, take away fears, whether they be privacy or cost or cybercrime or skills, and get rid of those, and that will drive up cost, which will drive up demand for the internet exchange. In truth, the majority of the BDUK rollout is going to develop 21 CN nodes that are sufficient to get most people. That's not 100%, but sufficient. That's driving out the connectivity to the premise and the place. It's the people we need to get it done. Yeah. Now, I would like to see this forum do more of that. Yeah. And do more of the connectivity.
I think you're being unduly pessimistic about the degree to which one supplier dominates the market. If you look at the statistics, I know this is obviously primarily filled by English subscribers, but if you look at the statistics, it's not the case that BT is that dominant. It has something like 7.5 million consumer broadband subscribers, but then two other networks are in the 4 to 5 million range, and there's another one in the sort of in the 4 million range. So
they all use BT.
No, they don't. No, they don't. No, they don't. They don't at all.
The rollout of the BDUK network on that Western Scotland is BT. Yeah. So there isn't the option.
The other three networks that have prospered to that size, and I can show you the stats if you wish. Two have done it by.
You want to name them?
Yes, Talk and BSkyB have done it by local bundling, and Virgin Media with a completely separate cable modem network.
Yeah, but Talk and Sky unbundled BT exchange, so they use the BT infrastructure.
Well, they use the last mile, that's all.
And some reach beyond that, but they don't put their own fibre all the way up into remote parts. In certain places they do.
Actually, they do. You're completely wrong about that. They've built out LNU networks of incredible size in the UK.
Everywhere?
No. I mean, that's the problem. The commercial attract.
They touched. They put their own fibre. That's incorrect.
Well, no, they have. TalkTalk are putting a fibre footprint in York, for example. They're very small.
We're talking about.
I think we're again going back to your point of being confused. the supply chain is very confusing in these matters, and it confuses everyone because nobody really knows what level anyone's talking about within the supply chain. BT, you really need to use two hats with BT. You need to talk about OpenReach and you need to talk about BT. Although they are all BT PLC, it is very, very confusing if you don't use their two names appropriately. OpenReach are who TalkTalk and Sky and everyone else use. BT are themselves an operator. If you're looking at TalkTalk or Sky or any of these guys, they are, if you ask them, they are entirely self-sufficient. They operate tails based on regulated products from Ofcom. As far as they're concerned, they're buying their tails from Ofcom, not BT OpenReach. BT OpenReach just happen to be looking after the building. That's the way.
So they're trying to bring up to actually deal with wholesale as well. BT wholesale.
To some extent, but if you ask TalkTalk, TalkTalk entirely replace BT wholesale at a wholesale level. TalkTalk do everything that BT wholesale do themselves in terms of broadband act.
Again, let's not fight out here. The people that don't want to, but you try. For example, that's the point. We're generating confusion. Is this the right environment?
Well,
right forum to do that?
No, and the reason it wasn't particularly on the agenda is that, of course, we're working on those 4 large links, the 4 largest access networks in links, unsurprisingly, to support the regional peering initiative. And so far, they've actually been very supportive. They've lent their names to it publicly, and in the case of TalkTalk and Virgin Media, they've actually started taking connections at the regional exchanges, and BT themselves are hosting the regional exchange in Cardiff. So in general, they're giving a very supportive face towards what we're doing in these cases. The problem I think they face is that since they've already engineered their networks to be London-centric, it requires massive capital expenditure to start thinking about breaking out peering in other parts of the UK. Now, actually, it suits their agenda, but only long-term to do that. It suits their agenda because they don't want to have vulnerabilities that they know about in their networks, and we're being wound up. And it also suits them to plan for these things and know that they're going to be there and operated by people who will stick at it. If they've all said to me, both privately and some of them publicly, that if the regional exchanges were being run by independent outfits, then it's very unlikely that they even consider re-engineering their networks to take advantage of them. So it goes back to what I said right at the beginning about chickens and eggs. You know, that some of these things are going to take time to get fixed. I mean, if it helps to give a better exposition of all of that, then we can perhaps try and do that at a future meeting.
No, I support. I think if it wasn't for links, we wouldn't even have this meeting. We've had IXs in Scotland before.
That sounds like a good point to stop. Given the way I'm getting winded up this from the back. So, can I thank everybody for coming in, and particularly thank our sponsors for sponsoring today's meeting, and commend going to the social and continuing these discussions. Thanks, everybody.